Alright, so since Ben Avery left the Tim Dillon show, it looks like Tim's fans have not been too happy with the direction the podcast has been heading in. It's been well over a month since Ben left, and still the top comments on Tim's podcast are about Ben and how the show's just not going to be the same without him. Also, it looks like Tim is mostly just trying to have guests on now. 5 of the last 6 podcasts have been interviews, and the feedback from the fans has not been that great. And one of these comments even brought up how Tim last year said that if he ever has guests on, it'll destroy the podcast. So at one point, Tim was aware that him just interviewing people would not be his thing. But I think now he's just gotten to a point where it doesn't even matter. He's just looking to coast. And it seems like he doesn't really care what the fans think. I mean, people just want him to go back to the normal show where he just sits there and rants about shit. Like this person on Reddit said, all he needs to do is rant about news stories, current events, politics, his life. If he's going to have guests on, he needs to get better at interviewing and stop saying right every 2 seconds while the guest is talking. But when he's on fire, no other podcast is remotely close to being as funny. I hope he gets his shit together soon. And then somebody commented on that and they said, I keep wishing that would come back, but he's not angry anymore because he's got money. He's got the house in the Hamptons. He's got the Bentley. He doesn't care anymore. I just keep listening to the archives. And you know, that's why I'm making this video, because maybe I'll piss him off and I'll start making better content, because I do think him making a lot of money has something to do with it. Like in the beginning, he knew how valuable Ben was and he was his best friend and you could tell he cared about him a lot. But as Tim became more famous and made more money, I think his ego got a lot bigger and he figured Ben was expendable. Also because I think Tim's realized that he's networked enough and he's gotten to the point where he can pretty much just coast off of all the connections he has. Like, he can go on Joe Rogan whenever. He's talking to Bill Burr, Louis C.K. He's friends with Steve Will Do It. And he just interviewed Andrew Tate. I think he's done something with Cody Ko. He's done the H3 podcast. I'm sure he's done every comedian's podcast out there. I mean, this dude knows how to network. He has like all the connections. So at this point, I don't really think he cares if the fans don't like what he's doing. And it looks like he might slowly be turning into the person he once hated. Like this person said, didn't he used to talk shit about how stupid other podcasts were that just had on the standard people making that week's podcast rounds? Like, come on, bro. And when Tim used to make fun of that, he was right to make fun of it. Just a comedian interviewing another comedian on a podcast. I mean, that has gotten so old at this point. I don't know who's looking for that anymore. And I like what this comment on his newest video had to say about this. This person said, cool, another guest show podcast. I can't wait till Tim Dillon starts doing jujitsu and eats elk meat. So I think Tim is definitely moving backwards with the whole guest thing every week. I mean, if that's what he's going to be doing, he'll still have a good following, but I'm sure people are slowly going to start to lose interest. I mean, already people have obviously noticed a huge change here, and they don't think it'll ever be the same. And in another video, I compared this to when Brian Redban left Joe Rogan's podcast. And obviously it's not the exact same. There are a lot of differences. Like when Brian left, Joe's podcast grew a lot more, and I think most people are happy he left. But then after a while, I think people did start to miss him, because what Brian and Ben did for these shows, they just made him less serious and more goofy, and it felt like two friends just messing around. And I think Joe was able to pull off this transition so well because it was still early on in podcasting, and he was interested in interviewing people other than comedians and just having interesting conversations about whatever people had to talk about, and he was good at interviewing people. But now there are just so many podcasts hosted by comedians interviewing other comedians, and a lot of their fan bases overlap. So I think once you hear Louis C.K. on Andrew Schultz's podcast or Joe Rogan's podcast, I don't know if you're going to be that interested in hearing him on Tim Dillon's. Like that comment said earlier, I think most people are going to Tim's podcast just to hear him rant about politics, the culture, whatever it is. So before I finish this video, I just want to show this one Reddit comment, because this is an intriguing theory, and I think there might be some truth to this possibly. This person said, I'm convinced Ben played a larger role planning the show than most people think. Lots of old episodes are full of Tim talking about shit Ben found on 4chan or Reddit. I think Ben would find a few relevant news articles and Tim would pick his favorite and use that during the show. I still like Tim, but the dynamic of the show is just completely different from a year or two ago. We went from a gay Rush Limbaugh / Alex Jones to a boring generic comedians podcast. So maybe that first part is possibly true, and then also combined with Ben just not being there laughing with him and not having the same chemistry. Maybe without all that, he just feels like he's not capable of doing it anymore, and he figured he'd just get away with doing guest podcasts. That's what it seems like to me, at least. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Then hit the like button, then hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.